Invasive species. I know that's a big hot button phrase going on right now, both in the reptile hobby as well as in general. But we kind of do need to talk about this as, things that we have done as humans. We need to, essentially accept that we've done, learn from those mistakes, and move forward not only to benefit with those invasive species, as well as not repeating those mistakes in the future. So getting that out of the way really quick before people yell at me, because I know sometimes people don't even like it being talked about, I'm going to talk about 5 invasive reptile species that occur around the world that we can talk about, how they were introduced, and things that as a hobby at the end we can talk about that we can do to improve those situations and contribute to in the future. So, very first thing, number 1, not talking about Burmese pythons. It's been talked to death. Not doing that one, okay? We are going to talk about probably a couple other that you may have heard of, that you probably have heard of, but maybe some other ones that you didn't even think about. So, getting right along, the one that you probably wouldn't think are invasive at all, Russian rat snakes. So the Russian rat snake originally found in Central Asia, and then a little bit into Russia. They're reverse exported to us from Russia, so we call them Russian rat snakes. Really cool species of snake, fairly diurnal, very handleable. They make amazing pet reptiles, which is unfortunately essentially how they were introduced. An exotic pet owner who was bringing in or had Russian rat snakes near an airport in the Netherlands ended up releasing snakes. We don't know if it's because they escaped or because, financial or life difficulties happened to where they needed to be released, or he felt that they had no other option. They released them. And unfortunately, a thing about the Russian rat snakes is that they're very hardy and they can adapt to a lot of different climates. They're found sometimes at very high elevations, very low elevations, a wide variety of temperatures and humidities and different habitats, and they managed to establish a small population near this airport in the Netherlands. It was only a few small animals, but being generalists, being very hardy, and being diurnal, they were able to compete with native snakes and other native reptiles to almost outcompete some of them during different parts of the day and during different environments where they normally wouldn't have to deal with that competition. So while it is not nearly as large scale as some of the other ones that we already know about or that I'm going to talk about on this list, it is one that a lot of people don't really think about because, number one, reptiles in Europe in general isn't really a thing. Most people don't even connect those dots. They'll hear like the Russian or the European, and a lot of those are really more Central Asian species, like the Russian rat snake, but there are reptiles there, and unfortunately this is one that is fueling a lot of kind of bad representation for the reptile community in Europe, where someone who either by accident or very short-sightedly released animals causing this unfortunate invasive species in the Netherlands of all places. Now, before the polarization of Burmese pythons down in Florida, there was one species that we've known for the longest, probably the most famous, definitely the most widespread, and for sure one that we did do on purpose. And that is the marine toad, or better known as the cane toad. Now, originally cane toads come from Central and South America, and they were used a lot in early European colonization as a natural pest control for different crops, mostly cane and sugarcane, which is why they get the nickname the cane toad. They are very good at what they do. They are very good at reproducing. They are very good at eating lots of stuff, growing big, growing fast, and making more little toads. And unfortunately, that means that while they're great at pest control, it spells devastation for competing native species. So, as we all know, they get very large. They're the 3rd or 4th largest species of toad, of frog in general too, I believe. I can't remember exactly where they sit under the pixie frogs and stuff. But they get large very fast. They mature very rapidly. And once they get to a very large size, we all know about those bufotoxin sacs that they use as defense against predators. So natural predators in those areas would eat those mature toads, and they would unfortunately die due to the intoxication of those bufotoxins. And then the smaller ones, they would be eaten by predators, and then the large mature adults, because it doesn't take a very large toad to be toxic to most predators, and then the larger big ones, you know, those 9-10 inch large giant toads, are actually eating small and juvenile in the larval stages of a lot of native animals as well. So they're getting them little and they're getting them big, which isn't great. Because they're toads, they don't necessarily have to be right next to water in very humid areas, just like frogs, so that allows them to spread out farther. And so because of that, with lack of competition, with over-competing, with no good native predator to actually control their population and their numbers, they blew up everywhere. So we all know they're very famous in Australia, because Australia has so many invasives that have to deal with a lot of the native animals there, and a lot of their native predators are dying out. There's really only one species of snake that is okay with eating that, and that's the type of tiger keelback, which is a small venomous colubrid that's actually capable of eating them, and also because of that, they end up being poisonous as well. But in other places where they've been introduced intentionally, so Guyana, Texas, Florida, Hawaii, Jamaica, Barbados, and quite a few others, they are a big problem there. Now, that being said, they do actually make fairly good pets if you're going to be responsible, wearing gloves holding them, and not releasing your pets. So there are quite a few people down in Florida actually, and Texas, exporting wild Florida, Texas caught cane toads as pets. This next one is the only one on the list that we know for sure was not intentionally released. This was for sure an unintentional introduction. This is one that was introduced to Guam in the 40s and 50s through essentially what happened is they hitched rides through increased human presence and shipping and industry from the areas, and specifically a military base being set up on Guam. This species of snake was introduced to the island and exploded. So this is the brown tree snake. This is a species of Boega. So we all know like the mangrove and the cat-eyed snakes. It's also known as the brown cat-eyed tree snake. They are originally from the Solomon Islands, Indonesia, parts of Australia. They're 4 to 6 feet-ish long, although large ones can exceed 8 feet in length. So it's a pretty big snake for a small little island. So when these snakes were, again, unintentionally introduced, but it comes with human expansion, was introduced to this very small island of Guam where there are no natural predators. And unfortunately, it was a perfect storm of no natural predators, no disease, as well as their usual prey, once essentially exceeded, started to eat other varieties, which includes several species of lizards, which managed to reproduce faster, caused this animal's population to increase to the point where it was, they estimated on average 50 snakes per acre, which other than Snake Island down off the coast of South America, where all of those golden lancehead vipers are found, where people aren't even legally allowed to go to, is the highest density of snakes anywhere in the world. They are solely responsible for the extinction of 9 out of the 13 seabirds that called Guam home, as well as 3 different species of lizards. These guys are probably the most monetarily and ecologically damaging reptile that is an invasive species on the planet. They have caused well over 1,600 power outages because as their population increased, their usual places for habitation decreased, so they started to go into more man-made structures, i.e. crawling into transformers, power lines, and electrical boxes, causing all of these power outages. In fact, during the span between 1987 and 1997, well over 200 power outages a year were directly attributed to the brown tree snake. I know it sounds like I'm just poo-pooing on this animal in general, but to be completely honest, it's something that we really need to pay attention to and be cognizant of. And now, after all this went through, they recently, as back in the late 90s, early 2000s, have really started to put an effort into reducing those populations through a lot of mitigation efforts, through trapping, through, believe it or not, snake-scented trained dogs, and a lot of efforts to reduce the population of this purely introduced and invasive species of snake. Now they estimate a lot more accurately 19 to 21 snakes per acre, which is still very overpopulated, especially in such a small island, but they are in fact working on that, but it's something that we need to be aware of. And again, unfortunately, there have now been found 8 individual brown tree snakes found in Hawaii. Several of them were found DOR, or dead on arrival. But they have not found that seems to be an established population in Hawaii, but they're monitoring it closely. And honestly, those are the places that that are the ones taking it most seriously, are these small islands where an invasive species of any kind, be it a plant, a fungus, an insect, or anything, can be very detrimental. And so because of that, a lot of places, not just islands, but other places, are really starting to take the introduction of invasive species a little bit more serious, as well as obviously the Burmese pythons in Florida. Day geckos were originally introduced to the islands of Hawaii by Polynesian travelers over 1,500 years ago. Unintentionally, essentially, they stowed away in their logs and in their canoes, and as they moved throughout the islands, they were introduced from their native island populations to the islands of Hawaii. Now, on Hawaii, they are not really considered invasive. They are considered introduced, but not invasive. However, now that I have said that, and this is true for all 8 species of geckos that are found on Hawaii, day geckos specifically, and there are 4 day gecko species found on Hawaii that were in fact released intentionally. Specifically, the gold dust gecko can be traced back to 8 individual animals to 1 university student that released them intentionally to monitor behavior, and they got loose. The reason why they're not really considered invasive is for basically 2-3 reasons. The first one is where they have found they were essentially released in areas that had heavy human population, where a lot of other non-native plants and animals are around, so they don't actually affect the native flora and fauna of Hawaii, of the different islands. Another one is that they do make great pest control because they're diurnal. They're active during the day, and during the evenings, and then at night they come inside, so they actually outcompete other nocturnal geckos for those insects, and they do make great pest control. And the last reason is because even though that there are no real native reptiles other than sea turtles to the islands of Hawaii, there are some old Hawaiian mythology and beliefs that there are old, essentially mythological reptile guardians and creatures that they, to some degree here, we're not going to get too much down this path, that the geckos are essentially a small physical representation of. So they're just kind of looked on with fondness versus an actual detriment to that, because as of right now, although the Hawaiian state government is definitely monitoring it, they're not really a nuisance as of yet. However, back to the local mecca of invasive issues that we have here in the United States, down in Florida, around the same time as the ones in Hawaii, so around the mid-90s, geckos were introduced to Florida and the Florida Keys intentionally. A lot of them were released as essentially they liked them in people's gardens. So people that had the gardens, they liked the ideas of all these cool exotic plants, and they liked the little lizards and things that came with that, and that cool, like, picturesque idea of paradise that people had back then. And when doing so, they didn't think they could really make it up farther than the Florida Keys. Unfortunately, they have also established populations in mainland Florida. And while nothing in Hawaii they're really out competing for as far as native species go, there are several species of native lizards and other animals that the day geckos, specifically the giant crimson day gecko, are out competing for. And so now, when you go to Florida and we see all those little lizards like the day geckos, the morning geckos, the Mediterranean geckos, those are ones that we are a little bit concerned about, and now they're starting to be some of the animals that people are wild collecting and grabbing and selling off for other pets, which is honestly not a terrible idea, and to be completely honest with you. Now, this last one hits home a little bit for me, honestly, and this is the most well-known, the most popular, the most present, and the most trafficked reptile that is a turtle or a terrapin in the world. This is the red-eared slider. Now, the red-eared slider has gotten the reptile community into quite a bit of trouble for a number of years now, and basically the culprit comes back to human greed. So, red-eared sliders are a native to the United States, although they are mostly found in the southern United States, mostly in the areas surrounding the Mississippi River down into the Gulf of Mexico and those kind of surrounding areas. They make it almost to Colorado, but not quite for all of my Colorado viewers out there. But because they reproduce very quickly, because they reproduce young, And because they did it very cheaply, they became the most popular pet turtle in the world. They are shipped everywhere as pets. And so what happens when people have pets that they don't want to care for? They end up getting dumped and released, unfortunately. And because they are adaptable, because they are larger than a lot of other native turtles, especially aquatic turtles, they can outcompete them in a lot of areas to where now Redeared Sliders are invasive in almost, if not every, established populations in every state with the exception of Alaska. And even then, our friends up in Anchorage, Jonathan's Reptiles, they do see Redeared Sliders go through them fairly often. They actually end up having to turn them away. A lot of people, if you're a little bit older, can remember this, that guy that would sell the little like quarter dime sized baby Redeared Sliders for like a quarter or $1 in like the little fish bowl on the side of the road or at fairs and things forever. And unfortunately, that led to a salmonella scare because little kids like to put things in their mouths, including a tiny little baby turtle, and that led to a salmonella scare. And so that's why a lot of places, at least in the United States, actually have a 3 to 4 inch size limit, so that's legally allowed to be sold to hopefully kind of reduce that down. That being said, they are outcompeting animals across all of the United States, and they've now been found in a lot of areas. They're highly invasive in Australia. They have been found in the UK. They've been found in Jamaica. They have been found on some of the islands in Japan. They have been found in, unfortunately, river systems in India where some of the most endangered turtles are found in the world, and they have been found in that nature preserve in those sections of rivers as well. And essentially all this comes down to because we decided to breed animals that were cheap and that were easy and did it fast versus necessarily ones that make good pets. So now that it seems like I've just sat there and just like ran through the horrible things that we've done, let's talk about what we as a reptile hobby can actually do to improve not only the image of the hobby, but actually make, significant impacts to this. And number one that we can do is essentially what everyone in the world right now likes to call cancel culture, and that's that we support things with our wallets. So animals that don't necessarily make great pets, but are cheap, like Redeared Sliders, like savanna monitors, and several others, and sulcata tortoises that are much cheaper to get, that are widely available, but don't make great pets for most people. We need to stop supporting people of getting those animals. I know they're cheap. You can find them in every big brick and mortar box store. We need to stop purchasing those animals to kill the need and the want for them, and then the supply for them will also go down. As well as that, we can actually start being a little bit more cognizant of where these animals come from in the wild that we all love. So for people who like to get out, like to go hiking, go find your local herpetological society. Go find your local park affiliate. The ones that go out and research and take surveys of the different reptiles and fauna in different areas. Let's learn and care a little bit more about them, and that way we can go out and do that. Although that being said, if you're going out, let's do what, as a Boy Scout, we learned back in the Boy Scouts of America. Leave it better than how you found it. If you're flipping rocks, make sure you put the rock back right where it was. Bring a bag for trash, pick up the trash while you're out there, things like that. Just be a little bit more cognizant of the natural world that we have to go with that. And then, again, supporting with your wallets, let's look into some of the foundations that go to help support native animals. So, like the yellow belly slider that is native in a lot of parts of the United States that's being heavily integrated as well as out-competed by the Redeared Sliders. There are places that do stuff with them, the diamondback terrapins, that are also being impacted by that, as well as other different foundations that exist out there. We can, put a little bit to them too to kind of help with that, as well as just doing this, just talking to people, just talking to other animal people out there, considering, it even happens to me, just wearing like one of these shirts. I'll go to the store and someone will say, oh, hey, my kid was thinking about getting a turtle. And, you sit there and you talk to that person just for a quick second, maybe they're not necessarily the best idea. Oh, well, it was only like $5 or something. Well, yeah, I get that and I understand that. But, we need to break that habit, honestly, as a society. And I'm almost done. I'm not going to get too ranty. We essentially need to break that habit as a society of buying cheap versus buying what is actually good for us, as well as, because they're living things that I think sometimes gets forgotten or muddled up with, that they're living, breathing things that, again, is best for them. So not the cheapest, not the easiest, but necessarily the ones that are best for them and for us. Sorry I got a little bit ranty. I always end up on my soapbox for these kind of more, you know, talky ones than just straight up talking about the individual species or the habitation or the husbandry requirements of them. But it's just something that we as a hobby, and honestly as society in general, needs to recognize that people have made mistakes in the past. We need to recognize them, accept them, and then take the lessons that we've learned and apply it to the future. Hopefully everyone did enjoy this. At least, I know it's not the most happy-go-lucky video that I've ever put out there, but at least maybe you got something and took something away with or gave you ideas for stuff in the future. Hope you did enjoy the video again. Hope everyone's having a great day. If you can or want to see more content like this, please go check out my Patreon. I have plenty of different rewards for the different levels of membership, from, you know, simple stickers as well as other t-shirts and one-on-one things. And honestly, something that I've been kicking around more and more lately is something akin to like a central carpet fest, where maybe we get, because I have a little bit of land here, we can all come down as like people in the hobby. We can hang out, we can barbecue, we can see my amazing collection of mostly ball pythons, and, you know, maybe take a field trip over to Colorado Gators, because they're not that far from me, especially considering we used to be in Denver. And maybe we can do something fun like that. And like the Patreons, maybe you can get like a little bit ahead of the game, as well as first dibs on available snakes. Once I make them available, I'll put availability lists up on Patreon as well. Sorry, I have to start doing better about those little self plugs, but hope again you did enjoy this video, and we will see you next time.